What's up, friends? Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Gary Ward, Anatomy in Motion author and teacher, and we discuss everything that's going on with your feet. Like, what the fuck is going on? Just how important is everything from the ground up? Why so many people experience back pain as a result of mechanics at the level of the foot? What causes flat feet, and are orthotics helping or hurting? Is the bubble butt craze actually going to cause more harm than good? And we get into some actionable steps on what you can do to unfuck your feet, move well, feel good, look good, and have a body that's going to serve you forever. Fascinating insights, lots of wisdom. Let's get into the show. Gary, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for joining us. I know it's late over there. You are in Indonesia right now on a bit of a world tour. I'm super excited to talk to you today because I really appreciate the way that you break down biomechanics and movement, really from the ground up. So I want to start by saying, like, what the fuck is going on, man? How did you get into this? Tell me the crazy story, because it's very interesting, and we'll see where this conversation takes us today.
Okay. Yeah, it's the normal road in. Is how did we get here? Well, I thankfully I got a little bit lost on my personal journey when I was training to be a teacher of foreign languages. I'm fluent in French and speak. I don't speak so much German these days, but I was a fluent German speaker and was training to be an educator for secondary school children in the UK. And they put me off very quickly. Let me just curse a bit there. And it was something that I wanted to do for a long time. So teaching was kind of in the blood. And so I lost my way. And so my way of finding my way was to disappear to the Alps and in France and work in a ski resort. And I became a ski boot fitter in my second season. And in about 3 days, I was taught from the very best in the Alps all about the foot. And of course, at that stage, I had absolutely no idea just how intricate it was, how beautiful it is, and how impactful it would be on the rest of my life, never mind everybody's, in terms of the physical connection with the body. But so I was a ski boot fitter for 7 years, and I always summarize it by saying I noticed two things. That when you make adjustments in a ski boot to make the boot fit perfectly, people would notice that their performance was naturally enhanced. They noticed it immediately, from going from big ski boots to good fitting ski boots, or from where they have pressure points in their feet because the foot's not aligned properly, and having it corrected and then put in the ski boot, ski all day, feeling much better. Precision, every movement is responding onto the ski, turning on the snow, performance. The other side of things that really struck me was that somebody could have their boots fitted and a foot adjustment made in their boot, and that they would ski without back pain or shoulder pain for the first time. And they would come back and ask me why. And of course, I had absolutely no idea why that would make a connection. But you can probably imagine, I was one of many boot fitters, but for me, it was, I had to kind of find these answers. And so getting more interested in anatomy, I was hooked. Like I'd moved on. I was interested in anatomy. I got my personal training license. I spent a few years doing sports massage and remedial massage work, as well as training people while ski boot fitting, and just getting my time on the body, basically. And eventually, the passion for the body overcame the passion for skiing, and I became a personal trainer. And I was working with people who always was working with people who wanted to train through their discomforts, or it safely, or overcome their problems. Never the guy who wanted to get big and or grow muscles with. So that's where I did the hard yards, working with people on the front line. And I had eureka moments where I thought to myself, I'm sure that foot can't be helping the way your back's feeling. So
Mm,
I will, what would I do if I was putting it in a ski boot? Well, I'd make this adjustment. How can I do that without a ski boot, without the orthotic, just in a gym, and was rolling stuff up and putting it under toes and asking them to move and see how things feel. And you can imagine the picture just kind of grows. And ultimately, what it became is a full body documentation of the journey of every single bone and joint through the
mm,
walking foot. A journey which lasts zero 0.6 to zero 0.8 seconds. And in that window, we can actually decipher where every bone should be throughout each microsecond of that period. So it became a huge piece of work, but completely innocently, really. And then people wanted to know what I was doing and how I was doing it, and so I would show people, and I became the teacher again. And so it was kind of full circle back to that. And so I feel like I've been an educator. It's 2024, so I've been teaching again really since 1999 when I started running ski boot workshops and stuff in the Alps, but teaching anatomy in motion since 2007.
that's so cool, man. Yeah, very full circle that you are always going to be a teacher. I guess you wouldn't have anticipated back in the day that it would be the foot that got you here. But it's always interesting, to just kind of, well, you're on the right track, so to speak. So you said that a lot of this starts from the ground up with the foot. You said it's a beautiful piece of machinery, and a lot of people kind of get weirded out by feet, right? They're like, they're not very beautiful, but I'm a little bit of an anatomy nerd too, and really interested in biomechanics and human physiology and all things health. And I've been interested in foot for a long time, like fascinated by just how much is going on down there and how intricate it is. Like a third of the bones in the human body are found in the foot, all of these crazy statistics. And it's a really intricate piece of intelligent design. And you said that you can anticipate kind of everything that should stem from the ground up by looking at gait, or the walking pattern that is, a half a second-ish in its time frame. So it's a snapshot in time that informs how the rest of the body is going to move through space. So explain to me a little bit, like, what is gait? What are some of the misconceptions or oversights that people don't think about when they are walking or moving?
Oh my goodness. That's a 10-hour podcast right there. So, well, we'll start with the intricacy if you want, because although a lot of listeners probably aren't aware that there are 26 bones in the foot, and 33 joints that connect them together, 33 joints that articulate in 3 dimensions. So we're always thinking about everything in 3 dimensions. So again, in anatomy, we call it sagittal, frontal, and transverse planes. So things that move forward and backwards is sagittal, side bending and adduction, abductions of the arms and legs, frontal plane, and then a rotational plane being the transverse piece of that pie. So part of the job is to look at each bone and observe which way it's going in all of those in each of those planes, and then decipher the optimal movement that would give the foot the shape it needs to be in order to do the things that it's supposed to do. So a foot is designed to pronate and supinate. So they're words that are quite familiar with a lot of people. Might as well bring in the idea in terms of a misconception that pronation has this kind of evil, bad, we must eliminate it kind of energy around it. So we've built orthotics to stop pronating. We have anti-pronation shoes. We have barefoot exercises designed to strengthen the arch so it doesn't collapse. And all of this is for me going against the grain of what we want. Pronation is a very necessary movement that we really ought to be inspiring in the body, not just because it's a movement, but because it packs so much potential. I actually think it's the most highly valued movement in the body. If the brain was to tell you which one it values most, it would be foot pronation, and I can explain why. But if we do that later, if you kind of remember that.
I remember.
So gait then is a journey from when we put our foot on the ground to when the foot leaves the ground. We already know things like arms swing opposite to legs. We might not be aware that what we need to do is we keep our skull still and our body moves around our skull so we can keep our eyes on the horizon. And I think that's like an evolutionary trait where if we needed to hunt what was on the horizon, and we're better off doing it this way than having our one eye on top of the other. The things that, if I go back to like the 2000s, what I was realizing was that if I move my foot, it creates movement in my pelvis. But if I put movement in my pelvis and try to keep my core stable, then I realized very quickly that I can't do that. So keeping a stable core, which in the 2000s was really heavy science, transverse abdominis activation, core stability. As soon as you keep your core stable and you reduce movement in the pelvis, you lose movement in the femurs, and then you lost your movement in the feet. And automatically, the only thing the foot could do was to start pronating harder and harder and harder, because the brain values it so much to try and inspire movement in the body. But we were restricting it through practices. So my concern is that a lot of science was about making sure you stabilize something to check out how something else moves. And we started to lose track of what actual movement is. So I think for most people, movement is squatting, deadlifting, single leg stuff, pushing, pulling, but missing the detail, the fine detail of what needs to be happening in every joint. And that's kind of where I stepped in. So as I said, it's like the 10-hour podcast is how many what misconceptions have we have come up. So core stability is obviously being one of them. Knee mechanics for me is something that we haven't got that nailed down in the way we think and practice working with knee mechanics. And after a long dispute with a lecturer at a university in Ireland who was on one of my courses, a lovely man, he was really couldn't get his head around my opinion about what knee mechanics should be. And he came at me with all kinds of papers, and I read the papers, and I went back to him and said that it doesn't make any difference. This is what happens when the foot's on the ground. And he said, "Oh, you're taking into account the movement of the knee when the foot is on the ground." I said, "Well, yeah, of course I am." And he was like, "Well, the papers aren't." The papers are kind of like bolting a femur to a table and strapping a tibia to a board and asking you to bend or let the table do the moving and see what happens. And of course, it doesn't work like that. So for me, it became there's like one realm of anatomy which I think of as open chain anatomy, which is where you're lying on a couch. Open chain means the soles of your feet aren't connected to the ground. You can flex your hip and not have any responding movements in your spine or your knee or your ankle. But if you stand upright and bend your ankle, you have to see a ripple effect through the whole body. And it's those movements that are really deeply ingrained in the nervous system and the neurology of this human body that really makes it essential that in fact we do our therapeutic work upright and on our feet. Bring the two worlds together. It's not one or the other. It's very much about both, like pronation and supination. You can't eliminate pronation and just supinate. That's not going to work either. So you have to see value in everything, and every movement that we're capable of biomechanically is something that we must promote and have access to, so that we have access to all our resources, so that this thing called Gait can be efficient and effortless, that's ultimately my goal.
I like that perspective. I've always thought of the body, and I think you're saying the same thing here. Essentially, is like it's incredibly intricately connected. I say it's like a spider's web, and you can't pull on one strand of the spider's web in the bottom left corner and expect it not to cause reverberations up the rest of it. And again, if you take these isolated, scientific looks at things where you're sitting on a bed and just going through flexion and extension, well, that's cool, but it's not life, is it? Because most of life is organic, and it's on our feet most of the time, and it's requiring different demands of us, and everything is above and below and how it rotates and things like that. So if we start with the foot, and the foot is a problem for so many people in this life, why? What's actually going on? What is the cause of foot dysfunction? Is it shoes? Is it something else? Like, what's going on? What's the biggest issue with feet?
This isn't an answer I've locked down. I have been asked before, but because I don't know necessarily if there is one, but I'll give you a few kind of ideas. And I think it might have to go back to the thing that I said we'll talk about later. And so, if the reason people have problem with feet is that there's a piece of literature that says, if I let me pull it forwards into my brain, that says that out of all of the feet, 70% of feet are abnormal and 30% are normal, right? Now, when I read that, I questioned, I'm not really sure what normal is. I don't know how we're defining normal, because if normal is a neutral foot, or normal is operating within defined norms, and a norm can be anywhere between 0 and 16 degrees of pronation, then lots of people are fitting in that. And if the right foot is different to the left foot, it creates problem in the body. So I really struggled with normal. So I ditched the 30%. There are no normal feet. We're just going to have to work with whatever we're presented. And nearly everyone has something to work with down there. And then it said, of those 70%, which I've now categorized as 100%, 95% of people are pronated, and 5% would be supinated. So you're rarely going to see the high arch kind of walk into clinic. It's always going to be the flatter arch. Now, the reason I suggested that the brain's most valued movement would be pronation is because the vast majority of muscles in the foot are set up to supinate the foot. That might sound counterintuitive, but I have two rules. Number one is that muscles lengthen before they contract in motion. So whenever you're out walking, you'll never see a muscle contract from neutral to short. It will always be from a lengthened position back towards the midline and through to generate the opposite movement. So if I bend to the right, muscles on to the left, sorry, the muscles on the right lengthen, contract to bring me upright, and continue with momentum to bring me this way. And then muscles on this side are decelerating to get me to come back this way. So this like tick-tock of movement happens all the way through the gait cycle. So in pronation, the vast majority of muscles are set up to supinate the foot, which means if I want to get the best supination out of those muscles, I need to be damn good at pronating the foot. So that's where we have a huge focus on the foot on its tripod, 2 points of contact, first metatarsal head, fifth metatarsal head, and then the heel, and allowing that foot to spread. And when it does, all the muscles of supination lengthen eccentrically to capture that movement, and then contract to generate the supination, and we have movement. I put my foot forward, pronate into it, supinate out as I propel my body forward. So what's actually happening when I pronate my foot is I'm actually eccentrically loading or generating the contraction potential in my whole extensor chain. So the foot will supinate as a result of a pronation. The ankle will plantarflex as a result of a pronation. My knee will extend as a result of a pronation. My hip will extend. My glutes will activate as a result of a pronation. So my whole extensor chain in the things that propel me forwards in life comes from a good pronation. If I can't pronate my foot, the rest of it is effort. It's me lifting my legs forward with hip flexors overactive. My glutes are sleepy. My knees don't extend. We have so many kind of issues as a result of not being able to pronate. So when we have problems going on in the body, what my brain will do is it looks for the biggest win it can get, which is to pronate the foot. Because if it pronates the foot well, it stimulates the extensor chain, which gives us movement forward. So I think that in many people's postures, you can equate the upper body shape that they've got with an influence on the pronation. I'm just going to scratch that, and I'm going to go back to a more obvious scenario before I paint that one. The obvious scenario is people who stand with their feet at 10 to 2, or in particular have one foot turned out at 10 to 2. You know that one?
Yeah.
We call it a duck foot. Yeah. So the foot's turned out. Let's just say it's the one foot. Why would a person just turn one foot out? And the reason is if the more you turn the foot out, the more contact you gain in the first metatarsal and the fifth metatarsal up with the ground. So if my foot rests like this in neutral, but collapses like this onto the ground, all of a sudden I've got no movement to move into pronation. So if I've got no movement to move into pronation, I can't stimulate my extensor chain. So the brain's clever strategy is to turn the foot out like this. And because it started like this, as you turn it out, it brings a contact point to the ground that you want, the metatarsal head. And now I've actually got space for pronation. So now I've gained some space to pronate and get some extensor chain activation. It's a win. So it's taken the highest value is to generate pronation to help me move forward, turn the foot out, which we, by the way, have coined as that's bad, and we should turn our feet straight to be better. Which is very limited thinking because it's only going to cause later problems somewhere else down the line. It might feel good in the short term. But if this foot, if you start to teach this foot to pronate properly, moving the bones, 26 bones to organize, 33 joints, and you start to get that to pronate correctly and then connect that up to the hip with a good ankle flexion, knee flexion, hip flexion, and whatever else we need at the pelvis, you'll actually watch that foot slowly turn back towards forwards. It's a really amazing thing. So we want to create an environment in the body where it reorganizes itself, not try to reorganize the body and then plod through, because that leg is what I call a pronated leg, not just a pronated foot. And then if we turn that leg in and this whole leg internally rotates with it because it maintains its pronated leg position, I'm just pushing a pelvis, tweaking into a spine, causing other problems elsewhere. So that for me is, you know, harsh to say, but limited thinking going on in the thought process before we understand what we can do. So to go back to your question, why are feet problematic? And I don't think there is an answer. I certainly wouldn't suggest it's shoes. I despise this whole kind of like shoes are messing our feet up. I mean, they could be, but if they're poorly fitted or you're buying one shoe for you, and that in itself might be determined as science, right? Getting the right shoe for you. I'm a nightmare. Go to the shops. Wife hates it. Take forever. Put my foot in. No, that rolls awkwardly. No, I can feel my heel hits the ground too soon. No, not liking that. She's going mad, and I'm like, I need to buy my correct shoe. I also don't think all barefoot shoes are the solution. Some are great, some are not. Some within the same brand do well and others don't. It's not an exact science, but it's about having well-fitted shoes, and I really do despise that idea that everybody's being told shoes are causing the problem. It's like saying sitting down all day at school is also causing the problem. But kids who don't get outdoors, you should be able to sit down and get outdoors and be sporty and be active, and things are okay. But we have injury, we have birth, which is a nightmare for most people. And sometimes our journey into the world is not as clean as it would like. So the body is then trying to find a way. It's always trying to find a way to first crawl, to then get upright, to then run, and then be quicker than the next person, and stronger, and all the way along, it's picking up these insults to the body, as A.T. Still described them, the founder of osteopathy. And I think what happens is we just keep looking for, how do I get more forward propulsion? How do I get more extension into my system? And the way to do that is to turn our feet out, or valgus knees, or anterior tilt our pelvis. And not everybody fits the same mold, but you'd be surprised how many do. In fact, I think there are very few ways. When we do stand upright, we've got very few ways of organizing our posture in a way that's different. So we see the same all the time. I've got books of clients I work with. I draw stickman drawings and of everyone, and you'll just start to see commonalities all the time. Weight in the left foot versus the right foot, or vice versa. a pelvic tilt, a hike on one side, a rotation. You know, these are things that there's not many things that we can do to distort ourselves. So if we pay attention to the distortion and have a clever solution and thought process, then we should be able to reorganize that system to reorganize itself.
And reorganize.
So, yeah,
oh, sorry. I was just.
No, I was going to say it's a tough question. Why do we? But people do, and I'd like to say that the feet can be problematic and cause problems in the body. But also, if you've had like a huge head impact or a shoulder there, and you dropped your shoulder here, it will filter down and start to make changes in the feet. And the interesting piece then is, I can see that foot's turned out. Do I treat that foot? Or do I have to treat the shoulder? Like what came first? Now I have to be interested and pay attention and take care and go, or even just, I'm going to spend 5 minutes with that foot. And if nothing changes, because I have a belief that we can change it quite quickly, because I have experience in that regard. If it doesn't change, I'll go, there's not much going on down here. I need to look elsewhere. And then you start to say, what have you done anything? Have you hurt yourself? Did you have a shoulder? Oh yeah, I hurt my shoulder. I'll just look at that shoulder, and then you start sorting the shoulder out, and the spine movement comes back, and the foot turns in. It's fun, but it's, I don't know if it's for everyone, but for me, it's the what's his name, Sherlock Holmes of potentially. But I'm really, really interested in how people got into these shapes, so that I can better help them get out of them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a fun puzzle because the body is uniquely complex, and I think we're really good at subconsciously adapting and borrowing range from other areas if we lack it in a certain area. And it's interesting that you said, it goes back all the way to birth. Like I think about my first son, we worked quite diligently when he was born because he had torticollis, which is kind of the position that he was in the womb, which creates, tension on one side, lengthening on the other side, which will inform everything. So we watched how he would have certain patterns and tendencies when he was crawling. And oh, look at that. He's hiking with the left leg and he's tucking the right leg. Interesting. How do we correct that? But most people, they don't have an eye for this stuff. They're now 40 years old with back pain and they're saying like, what's gone on? And sometimes I appreciate the nuance in your answer, which is, knowing how you got there is probably the answer to reverse engineering it and fixing it. Otherwise, we end up with what we've got globally, culturally, even at a health level, which is band-aids over bullet wounds. Oh, you've got high blood pressure. Here's the medication. Not, well, let's figure out why you have high blood pressure. Similar thing going on here with the system being very complex like it is. But I'm really interested in this compensation where if pronation, aka, this overpronated, you said, is the majority of people who have foot problems. It's kind of like the collapsed arches, right? Flat feet. And then we go in and maybe the Band-Aid solution is, oh, well, we're just going to prop those up with orthotics without addressing the root cause. So in that case, because people ask me about orthotics a lot, are orthotics hurting or helping in that case without any, global holistic re-engineering of patterns?
Let me show you. So all the podiatrists get upset with me, but
let's piss some people off. Come on.
Yeah, I've spent years doing that, unfortunately. So here's a foot. Beautiful piece of engineering that it is. Now, this is the talus bone, sits below the tibia, and is actually the single bone that connects the leg bones to the foot bones. It has an articulation here. I call it the driver of the bus. It moves like a steering wheel. And essentially, traditionally it's hard done by, because they call it a slave joint. It doesn't have any muscle tissue that attaches to it, and therefore they call it the dumb bone because it's got no kind of sensory feeling. I actually call it the emperor. It's the big bad boss, because when I get movement in the foot, such as movement like this as a pronation, I get movement in the talus. And most people, 95%, are going to find themselves in this kind of flattened position. If you look at the talus, how it turns and faces towards the inside, this would be a left foot. Now, most people that you see, when you do an assessment, you can easily feel this bone with your fingers. You feel it rotated towards the inside, sometimes dropped down to the inside as well. And then what you have is a compensatory response through the forefoot with an abduction or an inversion or whatever. Too much detail. Now, if you take that foot that sits nice and flat like this and put it on an orthotic, create a heel cup, give it a wedge to create some contact here, and now some support through the arch, you might make a little bit of change in the shape of the bones. Depends how stiff the foot is, right? You might make a little bit of change in the foot itself, but not the kind of change that you really want. So now all you've done is lifted it up. That might center my pelvis a little bit, might take a bit of pressure off the knee, and that might be useful. But I still have to go through this articulation of pronating to supinating when I actually walk. So all I've really done is changed the foot's position, not changed its capability for articulation, but which is something that we can do very, very quickly with movement, which is to understand that this talus bone, which has been resting to the inside, actually wants to rotate to the outside as well. And to be able to go in and out and in and out is what it does in the gait cycle. So heels on the ground, it should be facing out, comes down, faces in, starts to face out, heel picks up, continues to face out. And the key piece is that you keep these guys, apart from on the heel strike, but you get these two guys, big and little toe, sitting on the ground, and then around those fixed points, these bones can begin to move. Because if I lose this guy, as I start externally rotating here, but he comes off the ground, I end up just having kind of this movement in the foot rather than the nice articulation. There's lots of oppositional movements going on. This is a huge movement in the foot, in the body, in the spine, everywhere. We have these opposing movements happening in joints. That's why joints kind of are shaped like this, so they can articulate, right? So we can inspire movement in a way that an orthotic can't. And so I actually peg orthotics as something like a last resort, because there's no saying that you're ever going to get perfection in the foot. There's no saying that you're going to get it bang on, but you have to give it a chance. So you give it a chance by inspiring movement. And if there's still then some leftover pieces, maybe you want the orthotic. But my experience actually is the more movement you have, even if it's not perfect, and the more that filters up to the ankle, the knee, the hip, the spine, the more freedom you have in your body, you have access to more resources, the less kind of crutches and props you actually need. So we actually use wedges. And these wedges are things that I would do if this is off the ground like this, to place a wedge under here and then start the movement so that the wedge promotes the movement we want, slows down any wayward movement. We use it technically. It's very simple, but it would inspire movement in anybody. And that's why we sell lots of wedges and have programs where people can start to move their own feet without even needing to visit a practitioner. But again, the big difference is that the orthotic is not going to change the mechanics of the foot. We have to do that. And either the practitioner does that or you do it yourself in the living room. But that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, very cool. So you've got like this tactile piece of just like retraining the brain, how to create new sensations, becoming aware of these movement patterns. Is there a real issue here with like foot weakness, as a lot of the muscles become atrophied or overdeveloped, underdeveloped kind of thing? And is the solution, at least in part, strengthening the foot again, learning to crunch the toes and extend the toes, invert and evert the ankle, point and flex? Are you basically is a part of the solution taking the foot through the ranges of motion that it can do and strengthening in those ranges?
Yes and no. What I'm going to say is that atrophy in muscle, or a muscle that is not doing what it should, normally you have to go back a layer and go, the bones aren't moving the way that they should. So you've gone, start to move the bones, crunch the toes, point and flex the ankle, etc. Most of that stuff will not help the foot move in the pure way that I would like it to. Right. So, for instance, the two metatarsal heads are gold standard. They have to be on the ground if you want to inspire movement. So as soon as I do like a toe crunch, I actually lift them off the ground. So when my foot is supinating, the toes should be going the other way to the scrunch, not this way. So what you're doing now is you're contracting tissue, but you're not inspiring the movement in the joints. Yes, you can get range by doing this and making circles, but there's so many joints here that aren't influenced in that process. And so the first thing to do is to get these bones moving. If the foot's stiff and the muscles are atrophied, or if the muscles are atrophied, it's probably because the bones aren't moving. So what the bones are supposed to do in a pronation is the foot lengthens as the arch drops and spreads, and you get the metatarsals to spread. And each one of these has got tissues in between. So the movement like this will start to lengthen that tissue, generate a contraction of that tissue. That's the first contraction it's done probably in years. The joints to open on the underside of the foot, or the plantar fascia tissue is lengthening, generating a contraction. Plantar fasciitis, by the way, is normally down to joints that are open, and so the tissue tension underneath is large, and that foot can't move. So two things we have to do. One is to try and gently lengthen it more, because that will put the first stimulus into the brain to go, shit, I better contract that tissue. Contraction happens. Now you've got your first little piece of supination. Now you can focus on the bone position to get in and out of that. And pretty quickly you can get those muscles lubricated, tissue in a great place for contracting and decelerating movement and being part of the big picture again. So a lot of what we might call conventional exercises for feet never made sense to me, because they don't involve that deep articulation. And actually, I think it's even simpler to follow a process like this, using the wedges to stimulate muscle, opening an arch this way, opening an arch, let it go to the ground, creating a movement that allows it to come up again, connecting that to your knee, connecting that to your hip. It sounds like a lot, but they're actually really simple movements. So that's the route that I've taken. And the people who come and study with me, they won't be using those conventional type of exercises anymore, because there's so much more to be gained from this.
Do you think a lot about, I'm thinking as you're talking about wedges and things like that, do you think a lot about using nature's wedges, if you will, like different textures, stepping on rocks, stepping on stones, walking on the beach? I know sometimes if you go for a long walk on a beach, people will say like, my feet are so tired, as they're being put in these like spready kind of ranges, they're being asked to do different things they don't usually do. How much could nature be an ally in something like this?
100%. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I even thought of, even not in nature, but outdoors, and you've got curbs that are kind of angled, and you put your foot on it. And I was always thinking, so using shapes. Effectively, the worst thing to do, I think, is probably to walk around on a flat surface. The reason being is because the way the foot falls onto the ground will be the same as the way it fell before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. And if you're doing your 10,000 steps a day, your footfall is going to be the same. And so we have to have something that makes a change. And that's when, for the first time, you can put a little wedge here on an angle, and we've gone fall flat, fall flat, fall flat. Oh, but this one, it meets the ground here, creates a change. All of a sudden, you're opening joints in a new way and stimulating tissue. It can be as simple as that. I always remember a student saying movement is medicine, and it wasn't my line. I heard him say it, and I thought he's absolutely right. Because if you start, so let's say you do your toe scrunches, and then you do your point and flex. Okay, I'm being slightly facetious, but you do that, and then you go for a walk. There's no value carryover from those two things to your walk. But if you've taught your foot to be on 3 points of contact, to lengthen and spread, to open the joints on the base, and for all the joints to get close to doing what they're supposed to do when you go for a walk, they carry on doing that. You learn it, and then you do it. So every step you take, you're taking the therapy with you, rather than just doing it in a room and leaving it and doing something else. That's, the vast majority of people don't do their homework that the physiotherapist gives them, because they haven't added any value to it. As soon as they can feel the difference, if they can feel the difference in the session, they notice it when they're walking, they sit different in the chair, their shoe feels different or more comfortable, or they don't have the pain they walked in with, they will do their exercises. And it's that idea of certainly in this regard, the impact you can have from generating that movement, changing that experience of being on a flat foot to something else is huge. And so nature, sorry, I have to come back to your question. Nature is perfect for that because it creates variety. And a pronating foot is described as a mobile adapter. And I translate that as being able to adapt to the ground, aka external environment, in a mobile way. And so that's where nature really inputs good stuff into the system. Yeah.
Very cool. I want to start moving up the chain a little bit, going from foot stuff to butt stuff, if you will. I've heard you even teased it a little bit, sleepy glutes, and I want to talk about some of the, the butt crazes that we're currently experiencing today. So what are potentially some of the dangers of sleepy glutes? What's going on there?
It's very similar to the foot question you asked. I think the mechanics are, and it's not that I'm so obsessed with feet I can't get away with it, but you haven't gone far away enough from the feet. So I call it a pronating leg and a supinating leg. So we go away from the foot. We think about this whole shin, knee, femur, hip, and we can include the pelvis, right? So when your feet pronate, you should feel pressure go towards the front of the foot and the inside of the foot. And when they supinate, they should come to the outside of the foot and the back of the foot. And so if you were to input that movement into your foot, you should feel your knees bend a little bit as you go forward and your knees come straight a bit as they come back. And then your femurs internally rotate as you pronate, and they pressure goes forwards, and externally rotate as you come back. And that creates permission for the pelvis to tilt and posterior tilt. Okay. So the glutes attach to your pelvis and they attach to your femur, your thigh bone. And they would, if they shorten, they create a posterior tilt and a pull back of the femur, so a knee straightening. So that's your hip extension, and that's a stretch in your hip flexors. And so to get the pressure posterior and lateral requires a supinating foot. So when we supinate the foot, legs externally rotate, knees extend, femurs external, pelvis posterior. When you pronate the foot, knees bend, femurs internal, pelvis anterior tilt. Now that anterior tilt creates length in the glute. The knee flexion creates length in the glute. So if I find myself in a pronated leg, which 95% of people do, then I have the situation where my glutes are already in a lengthened position. If they're already in a lengthened position, it's very difficult to create more length to get the contraction we need. And so this contraction is sleepy, the range is reduced, hip extension is challenging. And that kind of highlights why the glute sleepiness is prevalent. And then what our way of combating it is the opposite of your toe scrunching exercise is to go for just clams against the wall, external rotations of the hip or extensions of the hip, all of the shortening activities for the glute. But the way to teach it, and really teach it what to do, is to get the foot into a good pronation, knee into a good flexion, hip into a good flexion, adduction. And obviously we do this single leg because we're in gait, but we get one glute at a time to lengthen, contract, and propel you forward, and the other one lengthens to absorb and then contract and propel you forward. And now you have glutes that are healthy and vibrant and moving because the hip can both flex and extend, adduct and abduct, internally and externally rotate, and the pelvis can tilt both ways, high can drop on both sides and rotate both ways. And that, for me, that's what all of this is about, is can every joint go left and right, forwards and backwards and round, because that's how you get all the muscles to experience this lengthening and contraction, opening and closing. And it's where, like the atrophied muscles in the foot, if the foot bones are stiff, it's the same in the glutes. If the hips don't have that range capacity, then the glutes have got nothing to do. What do we do when we've got nothing to do? I do.
Mm-hmm.
Take a little nap.
This is fascinating, and you mentioned, the new wave of movements we see kind of springing up, the hip clams and turning on the glutes, activating before a squat session. I've been noodling on something for a while of this kind of obsession that's largely driven by cultural things like social media, and is particularly prevalent for women now, which is this just craze, like big butts are back in fashion, right? And it's hip extensions galore, and it's these girls are putting up really impressive weights, 225, 250, massive hip extensions, really overdeveloped glutes. Again, knowing that there is consequences in a complex system, do you think like the big booty craze and obsession with hip extensions, etc., could have negative consequences in the kinetic chain?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not convinced any fads or crazes are that good for the human being per se, but that's kind of life, isn't it? And we have to let people do their thing. What people are probably missing, because they're so busy looking at the big booty, is going to be the valgus knees and the flat feet and the turnout and the that comes as a result of that, or the anterior tilt in the pelvis that's compressing through the lumbars. I don't know. Breast enlargements, big butt exercises, like these. What I mean by crazes is that they don't necessarily do us favors in the long term. But I'm I'm quite quick to say, I think it's great to eliminate that kind of. For me, it's all about the bones, the skeleton. Underneath everything, we're all the same. We are all the same. We're just skeletons. There's no colors. There's no nothing. We just everyone's the same at the core, and that's where the magic is done. So if people are doing work in their muscle tissues and it's compromising the system, if they have a problem, we don't have to worry about breaking habits or changing fads or getting them off social media. It's like, okay, this is what you need to do. These are how your bones are supposed to move, and when you do that, you'll have comfort in your system. You can set yourself free. You can reorganize it. That in itself will help people change their minds. I don't want to go back to that place. I want to have a place where I'm free to do this and play tennis at the weekend without problem and go climbing. And that comes from the skeleton, from the bones being able to do everything it needs to do in 3 dimensions. Each dimension has 2 ways of movement: flexion, extension, flexion, abduction, rotate left, rotate right, and other different words, but basically the same movements up and down the body. And I think that's where, because I started off as a trainer, I got to get people's nutrition right, and then I've got to get their mental state right. Now I've got to get people meditating, and eventually it was like, do you know what? I can just work with the skeleton. It does everything for me. That's my take on it. From people who you think they've got emotional issues affecting their body. Like, if we deal with the body, it really inspires them. The emotional issues can just kind of start to dissipate. Obviously, there's much bigger conversation there, but that was my chosen way in, and always will be. The bones. Phil Greenfield said something like, our bones will be here long after you're gone, so you should take care of them. Which I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think you're hitting on something that, kind of transcends a lot of this conversation too, which is I've thought about a lot of the time, like how intricately connected like the body is to the mind and the emotions. And it seems the more I think about it, the more it's like all connected. And like you said, if the way you fix fundamentally, the way you move at a skeleton level, and you start working on all of these things, it has the capacity to open up other areas of your life that you probably couldn't have even comprehended, in terms of how it colors your mindset and allows, like, the issues are in the tissues, right? And how much that could potentially help the aiding of release of like stored, stuck, stagnant energy, trauma, these kinds of things. We get into much bigger conversations there, but it's really kind of fascinating that a body that's fluently in motion and organically able to move like it should is free, and that capacity of freeness can go to dealing with other stuff that we want to compartmentalize and put in another box. Like, well, no, that's all therapy stuff. And it's like, well, a lot more of it is connected than we think sometimes. And do you think, because we've mentioned physical trauma, of course, like injuries that happen to the body, reverse engineering of that. But do you now start thinking about stuff like that, how emotional things or, life traumas, etc., also can impact the way we move? And, how do you break something like that down? What do you do with something like that?
I definitely think that these emotional traumas can affect the way we move. They affect, ripple through your whole life. Again, the kind of what I was alluding to just before is it's easy to get. That's not my speciality. Like, firstly, and a lot of people who might go to a physiotherapist, or a personal trainer will have this emotional baggage attached. I don't know if that's a nice term to use or not, but we'll go with it. And I didn't know how to deal with it. But what I realized was that if I do what you were just saying, and that is focus on the skeleton and inspire the body to move in a different way, it had a profound impact on their well-being beyond the physical. That you might have heard people have like psoas release, and then lots of tears come alongside. I've been in those scenarios countless times, so it's not just a psoas. I remember a particular guy who I literally got him to do what we call wall cogs, which is teaching the pelvis tilt and the rib cage opposition to get a spinal extension while the neck is flexing and you're stood up against a wall, so you're in line with gravity. There's no more forward head. It's all perfect. And I got getting him to just move his body, opening and closing and breathing, and that's just to get the mechanics to work. And it's a huge section of life that people are missing. How many people have not extended their spine or opened their heart? Or, to do that, we need to be able to flex a neck that's forever forward and looking at a phone these days. And for the tilt of the pelvis to go away from that pressure position that our feet are put in. And I shit you not, this guy broke down into tears for 45 minutes of inconsolable crying. I kept going back to he was all right, and I couldn't. And the energy that comes out, and the crying and the release, he was the biggest like one I've ever seen. But it happens way more than you would imagine, and then that opens an opportunity for people to talk, and then sometimes you just have to and I think it's a beautiful way to go in. I think it's dangerous to think we can separate mind body. I think the two are they're together. So while I made a choice to focus on the body, I am aware that I'm impacting the mind in a positive way. However, I don't think I've seen enough of the other way. So if you're working on the mind, that somebody's feet will start to reorganize themselves. Yeah. So I think the mind is more malleable through the skeleton than the skeleton is malleable through the mind. But I think it would be dangerous to separate the two and ignore the connection there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I do think that maybe the fastest way to model changes in the psyche is through the body. And I think this reemergence of like somatic stuff it really seems to be a fast track way. It's very interesting. You said it doesn't seem to play out quite as powerfully the other way. Now you will see people that can just work purely in the mental and start to overcome depression, anxiety, and things like that. It will inform a little bit the way they even show up in the world. You'll see classically people that have depression, they have a collapsed, rounded forward. They want to appear small in the world. They don't want to take up space. And as they start to grow in confidence, they do extend a little bit. But it's much more interesting to address the root cause of that first, because the body is informing, the way the mind thinks. And that perception of like, even just the fact that we've been talking about the body's main goal is to keep moving forward in life, like taking action, moving forward is this essence of like, I'm on the front foot. I have confidence. I'm attacking my weaknesses. It can really model changes in the psyche quite profoundly. And I've seen some similar things to what you've experienced, things that, to people that aren't in this world just sound kind of cuckoo and wacky, that, a physical realignment can cause an intense emotional release. But I don't think people realize just how constricted people are. And a constricted body is a constricted mind. And a lot of stuff is stuck. And all of a sudden you open up and holy shit, what's happening? A lot of other stuff can come with it. So it's really cool, man, to see like you said, come in full circle again. You're always going to be a teacher, and this path became your path, and now it's opening up all these other doorways where we can't really separate these systems. We can't compartmentalize them because it just doesn't really make sense, because it is all so connected. So it's quite fascinating. I wanted to talk to you about some people that are emerging in the online space with this growing wave of ease of access to technology, and everybody's an expert, and the growing platforms, and some really good information, some maybe not so good information. Like a couple of the people that I think have gotten really popular on social media, and I'm curious as your impact, your interpretation or reaction to their impact, and whether they're helping, harming, or somewhere in the middle. Like, have you come across guys like this on social media? Knees over toes guy, for example. What's your take on the kind of content that they're putting out?
I know a lot of people love his work. I am this is I genuinely don't follow too many people, and the reason is because it doesn't really serve me. It serves me to understand. I know that I've got a direction that I can move forwards with, that is going to be helpful to people who come in my path. I think there are a lot of businesses, a lot of social media platforms that are pushing forward ideas that they've come up with themselves. I can't really blame them, because I basically did the same. I came up with an idea. I kind of landed on something, but pursued to dive into that something to make it as good as it's got. And I think that they probably are doing that too. They have a belief that it works. They're seeing results and successes, and that in itself is commendable. Whether or not it's the ultimate way to work with the anatomy is another thing. But when people are struggling, they just need somebody who believes in what they're doing and can get them moving in the right direction. And I kind of trust that finally they'll get there. I've been I call myself I'm the last resort. I've been the last resort for years. All of my clients would be after umpteen surgeries, and this problem hasn't gone away, and I've literally seen everybody, and then I came across your page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's it all the time. They tried everybody else's page, and they've done everything, and they still end up at the door. And I'm sure that there's people who've gone on from me, because this work is also not for everybody. So it's a tough question to answer. I think we need to be mindful of what's real, what's not, what's useful. It's a really tough world. I say this a lot. It's a really tough world out there for people. And even in nutrition and health, like, how the hell, what one website tells you that this is correct, and the next second you're watching something that says it's completely not. I mean, how do we know? And I think that's going to be the same. It's going to be the same from one podcast to another, from one post to another, one course to another. And so I just think, choosing to lead with integrity and authenticity, that's what keeps me kind of strong, really, with this work. I know that this work carries significant value. I know it's supported by all the students we've had over the years. They stick with this work because there's some truth. I call it the truth of human movement. And it doesn't get any more true than trying to teach bones to do the very thing that they're supposed to do in 3 dimensions, move each way in each one, and then just connected the dots together. The connection of the dots is through the documentation of the journey of every bone and joint in the walking gait cycle. And that is the fullest picture. We have to go from one heel strike on the right foot all the way through back to that. And if you can do that equally on both sides, you are good. If you're doing it favoring weight on the right, not the left, with something a bit too far forward and a bit too far back, we can see it, and we can tell you what to do. We can whack you up against a wall. We can teach you to pronate your feet and move your shoulders, and your brain does everything else. I think, to go back to anything that's conscious, anything that's like, you have to think about doing this, squeezing that, contracting this, all of that stuff, not going to work. anyone that's trying to blame anything to create an outcome for you, like blaming shoes or blaming
Mm,
sitting or blaming whatever, all of that, just forget it. Find the people who are inspiring movement, who are connecting the dots, who are generating. You should feel the change in anatomy and motion movement the first time you do it. Not shouldn't take you weeks, and you shouldn't have to do it again and again and again. It shouldn't be something that ties you to a weekly thing, right? In my Wake Your Body Up program, I sell it. I always said I sell it for less than the price of a physiotherapy session. It should last you forever
mm,
because it's all movements that you need, a process to think about, revisit it again and again and again. It will sound different every time as your body morphs and changes towards it. And our whole process is about finding center. That's a physical center where everything's neutral. You can move away from it, back to it, through it, beyond. It's a mental center, as we've already touched on. All, this is real deal type work. No fads, no gimmicks. And yeah, you've got to put the work in, but it won't take too long, and it'll be incredibly valuable. And for me, if you can find those people and those to work with, you're going to be all right.
yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And what really stands out to me in your messaging is, the nuance and the empowerment back on the person that's running through this. You're not out there pretending to be, the savior for everyone. You're actually saying, I don't do this for you, and this is just a system, and it's a tool in the toolbox, but only you can help yourself. And I think that's the trap that we do fall into, like you were saying, with the confusion on social media. The average person's locus of authority is given to somebody out there. It's the person with the big Instagram following, or it's the doctor, or you name it. But they don't realize that nothing, nobody, no system can save you. It's ultimately going to come back to you, and it's this pursuit of truth and the results. Is it helping you at this moment? And knowing that, what helps you now might not be what helps you forever. But if you come back to the basics and the fundamentals, and they, are going to be designed to kind of keep you moving forward positively forever, which is, hopefully what we want. Because I think you're right, as much as we get into these conversations about good and bad and shoes, foot coffins that are destroying everybody, or another doctor in this space like, Stuart McGill saying nobody should ever do deadlifts. It's just a very dangerous exercise. Like, these statements of complete black and white truths really help people. They just kind of add to the mental chatter and the noise and the confusion, which mostly just causes people to sit at home and do nothing because they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed, analysis paralysis, so I'm going to do absolutely nothing.
I hear you. And then on the medical side of things, people, the doctors, the surgeons, they don't have enough time to go through a process to really understand. And we're really at a stalemate from what you just said, from not knowing what to do for ourselves to medics who don't know what to do for us either. So we just do what we can. And as a result, these systems are stressed and burdened and really struggling. And people are struggling too. And, social media was supposed to be helpful, but I really don't think it is. And I'd just like to highlight what you just said is, it says I don't enter into an I fix you, you fix me relationship with anybody. The only person who can heal you is you. And what we've done with this model, is to, sorry, my screen time limit's just come on. Just make sure the kids aren't on.
Oh, no problem.
What I wanted to say is the only person who can fix you is you. And what this model is a way for you to take part of that and to embody that and to take ownership of your own body by understanding these movements. And the more you listen to them, the more you see them, the more you perform them, you start inciting that change in yourself, finding center for yourself, creating a healing environment in yourself. So don't be suckered into the guru who claims that they can do the fixing, because they can't. It can only be done by you. Yeah. The only person who I can heal is me. So the rest of it, and I've had that conversation with many, many therapists over the years who are, I can't help anyone anymore. I keep doing what I think I've been taught to do and how I know I'm doing it right, but it's not helping, and they struggle with that. And I'm like, oh well, try this. And by the way, you're not in control. They are. So take a chill pill, step back, fall in love with your work again, and enjoy movement.
Yes. Yeah. That's it, man. All you can do is teach at the end of the day, and teach with love and teach with passion. And you have to kind of detach at some point from the fruits of your labor and just trust that people will pick it up at the right time and the right moment, and it will help them, and then they'll pay it forward. And, otherwise, like you said, have some fun, release Jesus, take the wheel kind of moment, and just let's see what we can do. So let's start bringing this one into land. Just, trying to leave people tactically with a couple of things they can do. So kind of a two-part question. The first part is, what can somebody do at the end conclusion of this podcast to just have a practice that is going to move them forward? Maybe they're dealing with lower back pain. What's something that you encourage? Is it as simple as just taking more walks in nature? What's kind of like a low-hanging fruit that they can do? And the second part of that question is, obviously, this is what you teach and you have a bunch of resources. So the second part would be, where can people go to learn more about your work?
First thing I think is not necessarily to be afraid of your back pain. Two is to recognize that your back pain could be caused by something elsewhere in the body. And that's reason in itself not to be too afraid of it. We do then need something to do for the other parts of the body, but I get people to think about injuries that they've had. Have you sprained an ankle? That's probably the worst thing any human can do to themselves. It's an absolute nightmare. The worse it was, the worse it is. But it probably means that you are either stuck on that side or not the other side. So have a little stand, check the weight in your feet. Do you feel that you've got more weight on one side than the other? If you do, and it corresponds to a same side kind of back pain, it might be that we just need to start getting weight into the other foot. And we would do that by putting a leg forward, bending a knee, and just kind of trying to get our weight left and over that foot, and just to see what happens. You probably end up with your right arm in the air to stretch that right side of your back out. So where your foot pressures are, if they're not even, you've generally got a change in your physical structure, which is going to create tension and compression in certain areas, and that might be what causes the back pain. Back pain's right there in the middle. So stuff above and stuff below kind of needs everything. So I call them self-checks, but really they need to be taught, which is the answer to part two of your question, which is what are the resources. And so I put together a thing that I call Wake Your Body Up and Wake Your Feet Up. And I've already said this, the idea was that they were to be less than the price of a single physiotherapy session. And last you forever. And so that as a resource would be, for me, I don't feel like it's too much of a leap to say, go and inform yourself, check the movements that are available to you in your pelvis, rib cage, spine, neck, and skull, learn how to move them in an integrated way to take the pressure off joints. Because in a spine, I'll use the foot, but as a spine, but if I'm stuck like this in a certain part of my spine, you've got a real pressure point here. We need to teach it to unwind itself by teaching it the both directions again. That comes down to this pelvis position, foot pressures, rib cage position, and exploring very, very simple movements. So that's my Wake Your Body Up program. And then the same way we can get the wedges and with the feet movements is the Wake Your Feet Up program. And they're bundled together with a third program, which is some exercises. And so all together, the three of them, a little bit more than a physiotherapy session, but individually, that was the idea, was that they would cost less than that. And I genuinely think that they're very, very beneficial, hugely impactful. Sometimes not for everyone, but for the people who stick with it and revisit it and listen to the instructions and the invitations, it can be very, very powerful.
Excellent. Yeah.
And then from a therapist's perspective, we obviously have online education. We're rolling out live classrooms again next year, and all of the educational side of things as well.
It's very cool. Yeah. And I think, if somebody's dealing with pain and they have dealt with pain for a long time, they'd be very happy to hear there's a resource that is a very reasonable price, because in my experience, people will pay almost anything to genuinely have a body that feels good and they don't have to deal with that again. So I'm going to buy this. I'm going to send it to my dad because he's dealt with lower back pain for a long time, and I guarantee he's not thinking about any of this stuff. So I'll send him it, and we'll see if we can get him thinking about his feet and thinking about his system as a whole. And I really appreciate it, Gary. This has been a really fun chat. Like nerding out on this kind of stuff, and I think your approach is really unique and novel and basic at the same time. Like super basic, super empowering, easy for people to get into, and gives them one of the many paths to potentially start moving well and get out of pain and everything. So one last time, tell us the website where that's at and your social media handles so everybody can go and follow along, and let's bring this one into land.
Website is www.findingcentre, spelled the English way, CENTRE.co.uk. And Instagram handle is at GaryWard_AIM for Anatomy in Motion. And we'll be there.
Awesome, Gary. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Folks, tune in next Wednesday. Bye-bye. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.